Hello, and welcome to the Moss Adams presentation, Protect Your Company from Supply Chain Failures. Before we begin, we'd like to take care of and address a few housekeeping items.
Welcome, and thanks for joining us. Moss Adams is pleased to present another in our ongoing series of continuing professional education webcasts. Our presentation will start in a few moments. Before we begin, here are a few things to keep in mind. You can customize how you both view our presentation and interact with the presenter. For better viewing, close all other applications and turn up your speaker volume. You can also adjust window size and placement. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a series of icons, each relating to a different aspect of our session. For example, you can click the File folder icon to download the group attendance sheet and a PDF copy of today's slides. You can ask our presenter questions during the webcast by clicking Q&A in the bottom left-hand portion of the icon bar and typing in your question. We'll do our best to answer all questions during the presentation or follow up via email. We'll ask polling questions throughout today's presentation. Per the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy webcast CPE standards, CPE credit will be awarded based on your participation in these polls. To respond to a poll, click the button next to your answer. If you're attending this webcast in a group, you must complete our attendance sheet to receive CPE credit. Please have all group members sign the sheet, and please remit only one sheet per group. Also note, today's session will offer you 1 CPE credit. To receive credit, you must meet the requirements as specified by the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy. You must attend at least 50 minutes of the session and respond to at least 75% of the polling questions. CPE credit can be awarded only to participants registered as themselves and is not available to participants who view the on-demand version. We'll track your progress and alert you when you've earned CPE credit. You can then click the certificate icon to open a PDF file you can save to your computer. As a reminder, the presentation you're about to see is not legal, investment, or accounting advice. We encourage you to seek the counsel of a professional service provider to apply this content to your specific circumstances. We're now ready to begin. Thank you.
Presenting today is Curtis Matthews. Curtis is the partner in charge of the Moss Adams Contract Compliance and Control Solutions practice. He has practiced accounting, private, government, and public since 1984. Curtis has deep experience in a wide variety of areas, including construction risk management, federal government contracting compliance, information system application control, contract risk management and compliance, and internal audit. He succeeds by providing needed services that are then able to bring value to other areas of an organization. Curtis has helped over 200 clients achieve their business goals. Joining Curtis today is Peter Jensen. Peter is among the leadership of Moss Adams Contract Compliance and Control Solutions practice. Peter focuses on construction controls, construction performance audits, and program best practices for clients in a variety of industries. He's worked extensively with corporate assessment teams, regularly visiting project sites, evaluating internal controls, and assisting with large contract changes. Welcome to the program, gentlemen.
Thank you, Tanya. Well, we welcome you to our webinar today. This is a topic that has a wide implication across a large number of organizations and types of organizations. There's a substantial impact on just about everyone here today. We have a list of the attendees and who's here, and for all of you, your suppliers can have a tremendous impact on your ability to succeed, and we're going to talk a lot about that today. We're going to cover with you issues surrounding, these critical areas, and we're going to provide you a lot of detailed information. You'll get a copy of the slides, and you can take that back to the workplace. Basically, all of us, essentially, us included here, even at Moss Adams, are part of a virtual business. We have suppliers that we use on an ongoing basis in order to succeed, and we have to leverage our internal capabilities to manage them well, and we have to be able to leverage their competencies and align those with our customers' needs to get to where we need to go. And the orientation of the materials you're going to see today are along the lines of, supplier capability to help you achieve the goals of your customer, whether it be a government customer, whether it be a commercial customer. The materials we're going to give you today are going to help you with that. Basically, success is directly related to our ability to manage risk, and compliance in all aspects of your supply chain is required, which basically amounts to having good agreements with your suppliers, good processes and controls around how you manage the supplier relationship, and having commitments kept with the suppliers that you're working with. You have to be prepared to think ahead about what some of the disastrous risks that can occur are, and to prepare for the impacts of those risks. Our three just key objectives are aligned with what I just mentioned. One, identify areas of non-compliance and risks with supplier contracting and arrangements, helping organizations to have a solid plan to protect your company from supply chain risks through effective controls and processes, and outline steps to detect and address supplier performance risks. Those are the three key objectives we promise to deliver on, and we will deliver on those today. Our agenda is essentially we'll talk about common supply chain risks. We'll talk about supply chain risk areas related to supply chain exposures, actually, and we're going to talk about the risks that roll up into the exposure areas related to your supply chain. We'll talk with you about supply chain opportunities, which essentially is your ability to manage risks with your suppliers, and then we'll give you some specific examples that will bring home the concepts that we're talking about today. So let's step back and think about common supply chain exposures. Where there are business risks in working with suppliers, we would argue that there are opportunities for you to outperform your competition who face the same risks. So let's just think about that. So you have a supply chain that's needed to provide goods and services in order for you to successfully serve your customers. Your competitors face similar supply chain needs and requirements and have to compete with you by their ability to manage their supply chain. If you are more effective and more efficient in the management of your supply chain, if you are better at detecting issues that occur along the way, if you build strong agreements with your suppliers in order to move your business forward in a way where there's accountability for performance and effective accountability, and you can do that better than your competition, then you're going to have a competitive advantage, and that's what we're talking about today. And, we talk about exposures and uncertainties there on the slide. We're talking about, what could go wrong. But a big component of this also is the opportunities that come from effectively managing your supply chain and failure to effectively leverage suppliers on the part of your competition, where you are able to effectively leverage your supplier relationships, can make a huge difference to your organization, and we would argue one of the largest opportunities for your business to succeed. And I can tell you, having worked in business now for many years, and I guess that, one day you wake up and you have over 30 years of experience, and you look back and you think about, what has happened in the various companies you've worked with and for over the years. I've come to find that some of the greatest opportunities to organizations come from understanding the very fundamental facts around key areas of the business, addressing those risks in those key areas of the business, and taking action that is effective and practical in addressing those risks. It's not the latest bells and whistles that are going to get you where you need to go. It's your ability to leverage people, processes, and systems in order to move your business forward with certainty that you know where you stand in your relationship with your customers, with your own people internally, and with your systems internally, and with your processes in such a way that you can leverage your suppliers to be successful in the long run. It really comes from basic blocking and tackling. One of the questions that came to us ahead of the webinar, as part of the registration process was, how do I address catastrophic risks in addressing our supplier base? And the best way to address and prepare to address catastrophic risks, which basically I would define catastrophic risk as a risk that is just going to bring your business down to its knees. It could cause you to fail as an organization. So the best way to address that is to plan for it. And a lot of organizations, honestly, they don't step back and think about holistically what are the catastrophic risks that we face. They're more about, a lot of them, the best organizations are not this way, but the ones that are less successful tend to look at the moment, look at the current quarter results that they're trying to achieve, or look at the current project that they're trying to accomplish, or the current contract that they're trying to move forward. But they really don't plan strategically for how to manage their organization to address risks that they face. And today, in your supply chain, there are a whole lot of opportunities for you to plan and address for significant risks to your organization. One key area is in the area of sourcing plan alignment, which basically means you have to have a strong alignment between where you're wanting to go in terms of serving your customers and where you're wanting to go in terms of ensuring that those suppliers that are helping you to get to where you want to go are doing the things that they should be. And that, I talked earlier about market risks. That's you can have a competitive advantage basically by managing suppliers better than others. There's a lot of financial risks that organizations face in dealing with suppliers, and we all know what those can be. For example, of a failure of a supplier to deliver products and services to you, or maybe a financial failure on the part of a supplier that didn't address its goals, and failure to address payment terms with them and getting what you should be getting from that supplier that's failed, can result in having to find another supplier, can result in failure to keep customers and be able to serve them. There's a whole lot of issues that from a financial standpoint that you can all imagine, I'm sure, related to failure to manage your supplier relationship. It can just come. A financial failure can come in the basic area of paying the supplier more than they're due, which we actually see quite a bit of in our practice. There's operational risks that come from failure to execute, business value that comes from impacts that comes from poor supplier performance. Imagine your customers that are getting poor quality product as a result of a supplier's failure to do what it should do. I mean, I imagine a lot of you on this call today have already experienced that. And essentially, anything that diminishes the value of your brand, your organization, whether it be a government organization to a commercial organization to a government organization to, if it's a higher education organization to any organization, basically, if you're failing to deliver the highest quality service or products to your constituents, to your customers ultimately, depending on how you define a customer, that's going to have a big impact on whether or not they want to stay with you in the future. And it's in the future, it's all about your ability to maintain strong relationships with your customers. And then, of course, compliance. Failure to establish effective contracts, and, of course, failure to comply with those contracts. So we have a polling question here. We've interjected these throughout our discussion today so that you can get CPE credit. So if you would please just click on which answer you feel best aligns with your thoughts. That'd be great. And the question is, what is a supply chain compliance risk? How is that defined? So, Tanya, I think you're managing the polls, right?
Yes. I'm going to go ahead and we'll give our audience, a good-sized audience today, so we'll give them just maybe another 5 more seconds, which in web time takes longer, but we'll then close the polls at that point. As Curtis mentioned, if you are here to receive CPE, please be sure and attend for 50 minutes and answer 75% of the presented polling questions. I'll go ahead and close those polls now for you, Curtis.
So we have, this is interesting, we only had 23% of the people on the call approximately answered the question.
Yeah, that's weird. That is odd.
That's really unusual.
I had someone say they did not see it. That is unusual. Oh, there we go. All of the above. We just couldn't, if you...
Oh, scroll down.
Yes.
Okay, got it. Okay, that makes sense. Okay. Apologize, group, for that. So, yeah, 75% of you said all of the above. We would argue that, too. And I'm really glad that you said that because it means that what we just went through is really coming through to you. So that was good. Okay. I'd like to talk with you now about, drill down really into strategic risks. Remember I was talking earlier about strategic as being a core risk facing an organization and the importance to think in terms of your customers, which you got, based on that poll. And another one of the questions that came to us ahead of time from a few of you was, what to ask when selecting suppliers, okay? And what I've seen over the years is a lot of organizations take a checklist approach to this. They put together, try to guess as to what some of the core questions are they should ask, and then they go in and ask those questions and kind of move on. We would argue that a risk-based approach is much better. It's better to think about what it is you're procuring, and what are the core risks that could face that, and think more comprehensively around your objectives and the risks that could keep you from achieving your objectives. So with that, with supplier selection and making decisions around suppliers and actions you're going to take with them, it's critical to think strategically, think long-term, and then, of course, there's short-term implications as well. So the first 2 bullets go together. Essentially, if you're having your sourcing plans aligned with sales and marketing, you have to really integrate that sales and marketing aspect of your organization with the planning and logistics that goes into then the procurement of the supplier that you're going to ultimately use. And I'll give you an example. I know of a company that was quite, I guess I'll use the word arrogant. It's kind of a strong word, but they're kind of arrogant around their customers, around customer commitments. They were basically recording the dates that they felt that they could satisfy a customer commitment in their system. They weren't really capturing when customers wanted product. They weren't really effectively getting alignment with the customers on, to address their needs in terms of when they needed goods and service. And then they really weren't tracking that. And then beyond that, the company wasn't really planning in a way to address the customer commitments that it was recording. that were basically commitments that the customer, that the company decided were the right commitment dates for the customer. So all kinds of issues around capturing good information about when customers want product, all kinds of issues around different silos in the organization not organized in a way to address the customer needs. End result, the company lost 20% of its business, about $100 million impact to the company's top line. The company's struggling. Stock price has been reduced substantially, and that will go on if I can't predict exactly what's going to happen with this company, but that's really not a result people want to have, and that all has to do with not aligning internally within the organization. And I can say to you that larger organizations have a big tendency to have this kind of an issue, but I'll also say to you that we've seen a lot of smaller organizations that don't have good alignment internally. And some of you are probably thinking, gosh, that's basic blocking and tackling, and we would agree that that's the case. We also know that there have been a number of studies done on people's motivations at work. A lot of people are more motivated. As you move up in the organization, we'll just put it this way, the leaders of organizations are generally more motivated by the success of the organization than anyone else in the organization. And it's a job of the leadership and the people at the top of the organization to get all those working within the organization to align with your customer needs and wants in terms of that, supplier selection and management. Unfocused supplier sourcing is another key strategic risk where organizations just let it happen. And sometimes this is done outside of even the procurement function. You'll have 100 suppliers for the same thing. I've literally seen that for some administrative things, small things. But I've also seen situations where the company will have 15 suppliers for a particular item and haven't managed the opportunity for quantity buys, haven't managed the opportunity to leverage schedule in with the supplier base, and that becomes a big problem as well. So what happens then is you ultimately end up spending more money than you should, and you don't hit your delivery dates when you should, or the quality that you should have. Another issue is over-reliance on the flip side on a narrow supplier base, where if you don't have enough suppliers in a certain area of your business that you're trying to manage and address to provide the goods and services that you provide, then if that supplier walks, that supplier goes bankrupt, clearly there's going to be a big interruption to your business. The other issue you run into is if you make a supplier too powerful, where they actually have grown to the point where they can command you because they know that they're the game in town. They're the only one you can go to. Then you end up paying more. You could develop competitors that can break away from you and start their own business and start competing with you, which I've seen. And so you can actually create competitors by not managing your own supply base, depending on the size of your company and how you're managing your supplier base. Other areas of strategic risk areas to really think about as you're wanting to go out and procure suppliers is the long-term capacity limits. Okay, so the supplier can meet our needs today. Can they meet our needs a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now? We need to be thinking out into the future in terms of the suppliers we're selecting today. And then, of course, we have to integrate our planning processes and logistics to effectively work with those suppliers. I want to talk with you a little bit about ethical conduct failures. I kind of moved that into a greater category of cultural alignment. It's critical that the suppliers you're working with share the values that you have. In fact, one of the greatest opportunities for success in working with suppliers is to have suppliers that are really a part of your team, that address customer needs the way you address the needs of your customers, and then align with you in that regard. And that is a soft area that can have big implications on a business, and that's something that may not necessarily fit into the checklist approach, but it needs to fit into your approach in effectively managing your supplier base. And then, of course, as we talked about, having your supplier strategic plans be aligned with your strategic plans. Peter, I'd like to turn the time over to you to maybe talk about some of the supply chain risks in relation to compliance, operational, and financial risks.
Sure. These tie into a lot of the issues that Chris brought up with the strategic, but what other risks do you face when something happens to the supply chain? How does it impact your company? The brand and image, if you pass along and you sell goods that are not up to your quality standards due to a deficient supply chain or products that you were supplied that you pass along to your customers, what long-term brand and image does that do for your company? We've dealt with multiple suppliers multiple companies that had issues in their supply chain with the quality that they were provided, and they pass that on. That customer might not ever come back to you and purchase if they get a product that is not up to the standards that you thought you were distributing to them. And then financially, pricing, how does it affect your pricing, your cost of goods sold? If you have a lot of bad products, what do you have to do with that inventory? Ultimately, this is affecting your margin, which can hurt your relationship with your investors and also impact just throughout the organization. And then finally, the relationships across the board, whether it's with the relationship you have with that supplier, if there's an issue and in your contract there's not a proper way to deal with it, how does that impact the long-term relationship with your supplier that there was the issue with? The customers, how do you gain their trust back? How do you work with them? How do you deal with the schedule impacts? And then also internally with the management and the investors in your company is, do they feel secure that if you do have a breakdown in your supply chain, that you're able to properly manage it? So I think we're moving on to our next polling question. Is effective? Oh, Tanya, go ahead.
Thank you. So is effective supplier management and performance compliance linked to satisfying customer needs and wants? And I just want to mention that be sure and if you have questions, use the Q&A feature. We have gotten some great questions in our queue so far, but if we don't have time during this presentation to answer them, our presenters will follow up and make sure you get the answers you're looking for. So please don't hesitate to use that as a great tool and great resource. So I'll go ahead and close the polls, Peter. 97% said yes.
We agree with the 98% of you. Definitely that supplier management and performance is linked to customer satisfaction.
So congratulations to the group on excellent answer. So now we're going to talk a little bit about some quotes that we came across that we thought you guys might want to think about.
Yeah, you guys can read these, but the one that really gets it for me is that middle one by Sam Walton. There's only one boss, the customer, and he can fire everybody in the company from the chairman down simply by spending his money somewhere else. And that's what we talked about with the risks, that the customer is the end goal here, is that supplying them and giving them the product that you're promising them, and any supply chain issues you have, that customer probably doesn't know they happen, aren't aware they happen, but they see the end product, they're the ones dealing with it, and if they choose to spend their money elsewhere, that your organization has the potential for major risk of failure based off what that customer's experience is dealing with your organization. So making sure the supply chain is the best it can be is giving that customer the best chance they have to work with you. And I guess ultimately we're talking about is the goal of your organization is to fulfill customers' needs. Any impact to that supply chain can drastically impact that goal. There's a couple notes on here talking about the quality, about schedule, about scope, and all of those areas that you have with your suppliers are things that can drastically affect the final product you're supplying. And making sure that you're able to satisfy your customers if your suppliers fail is your goal as an organization.
So, we've talked a lot about risks. We've talked a lot about opportunities. Let's drill down into some, improvement areas, some things that can help an organization to be successful in working with their suppliers. Obviously, your policy and procedures need to be in place, but what does that mean? And I think from our standpoint, most organizations we work with and come across have policies and procedures. They're often function-centric. Like, for example, the procurement function has its policies and procedures. The accounts payable function has its. The planning function has its. And then, of course, sales and marketing, they have policy and procedures generally as well. And so as you look at that, you just think, okay, so it's great, our organization has policies and procedures around procurement, we're good, but essentially, just about every time we do operational audits of this area, and just about every time we do one, we find that there isn't alignment across the organization as to what are the key steps that need to happen all along the way in procuring. Where are people throwing the requirement over the wall to another part of the organization and having the other part of the organization take action without really understanding what they're doing? Where are those disconnects that occur in the process, and are those understood? And in a lot of cases, organizations are literally shocked when they find out, what the flow really is between, customer to procurement to order fulfillment. They are shocked at how many disconnects they have and where those are. And that's where we want you to be in terms of not being shocked, but really looking at that and understanding it and ensuring that there's good alignment within your organization, because that is a huge opportunity for you. Another area, of course, is your contract controls. Basically, a lot of times contracts are thrown over to legal. Legal comes up with terms. And often what gets missed are key business aspects of the contract that need to be in place. It's important to include people who are familiar with the business side of the contracting, and even like auditors that you have in your organization that go out and see the aftermath of poorly written contracts and unclear terms and unclear scope and unclear basic ramifications for failure to comply with the contract, or consequences, or failure to have positive consequences for compliance, for that matter. So basically, organizations that we work with and see, and we're asked to help, often have an opportunity to build clearer contract terms that have clear measurement of performance in terms of cost, schedule, scope, and quality. I would lump these two together: operational compliance controls and verification of internal supplier compliance. That all goes together. And essentially, that's monitoring the process and the control performance of your suppliers on an ongoing basis. Again, I kind of go back to our experience. Usually we get called in, a lot of times, I shouldn't say not usually, but a lot of times we get called in when there's a problem. We're asked to come in, address the issue in the supply chain and the compliance, whether it be a capital project, whether it be a government contract, whether it be a commercial project or other type of organization. And we're asked to help address the issues that were there that led to a big problem that the organization is facing. Our argument would be that it's important for organizations to be upfront about looking at how a project is progressing. Look at how the controls are being and processes are being implemented, and understand those on an ongoing basis. That's your opportunity. That's a competitive advantage opportunity for you to be there earlier on rather than after the fact. And then, of course, then once you've identified needs that need to be addressed, another thing that often gets missed is having independent verification of the improvements that have been identified. In terms of other supplier management improvements that you can have, it's critical to basically have required approvals, of course, have good segregation of duties, which often gets missed, but also to have not only an employee code of conduct for your organization, but to have a supplier code of conduct. That's best practice. For example, in fact, I've come across this a couple times relatively recently, where there were pretty substantial contracts involved. It came to light that the person who was granting the contracts was being kind of not competitive about the process they took. We'll just put it that way. And then, as it surfaced, there were bribes being exchanged by the suppliers to the people who were responsible for procurement. And when you're in a situation like that, where a supplier has millions and millions of dollars that they're at risk if they lose a contract, or even hundreds of thousands of dollars, basically you have a high possibility of people on the procurement side asking for things that they shouldn't be, people within your organization. And studies, time and time again, I don't mean to be like a total naysayer or try to be, just inappropriate in what I'm saying about what goes on, but essentially a lot of time when there's a fraud committed, it's by the most trusted employee in the organization. That's proven time and time again. You can go out and look on the web and look at all the information that's been published on the common characteristics of people that commit fraud, and a lot of times they're some of your most trusted people. And having a good supplier code of conduct, having a good means by which your suppliers can raise issues without penalties and ramifications is big. And it also plays out within organizations. Driving in today, literally, on NPR, they're talking about a pretty high-profile case where a very large organization had committed fraud with the government, basically, in certain compliance aspects of what it was doing. And that organization, what came to light is that one of the key things organizations need to have, we'll put it that way, is to have the ability of people inside the organization to report an issue when they see it. And the best practice organizations and the most successful ones allow for independent reporting of that. It could be an 800 number internally or for your suppliers. Those are all great practices to think about. Another area of supplier management improvement is thinking about the method of procurement that you're applying. And we've literally worked with organizations where they ask us for a simple project, a simple item that they're procuring, whether or not they should go to a single supplier and try to just work that approach, or let the market determine the pricing by going to multiple suppliers. Now, that's an obvious answer, right? So basically, if it's not complex and there's a wide base of suppliers, generally speaking, you want to compete, have that competed to let the market drive the pricing for you and get the best possible pricing. On other occasions, you don't have that choice. You don't have that luxury. It can be a very complicated procurement. The more complicated the procurement, the more limited the supplier base, the more you'll end up with a cost reimbursable contract for large items you're procuring, for example, a capital project. that's very complex will generally be cost reimbursable versus lump sum. Or fixed price, depending on whether it's government. Sourcing policy procedure best practices, continued, is basically you really need to understand the regulatory compliance methods that you're dealing with, especially around federal government contracts and certain state contracts. Well, I'd say all state contracts, but you can really get into trouble in complying with government contracts as a rule. There's a lot of laws that surround them that have penalties that can be leveled on your organization, but also personal penalties that can be applied as well that you really don't want to have imposed upon you. So it's important that if you're dealing with the federal government, you have somebody that understands federal procurement rules. And we do get called in regularly where a company has entered into a government contract mainly with the federal government, and they'll say, "Hey, we have this contract, and we're concerned. We're not quite sure what we're supposed to do here to comply." And that's great. They're smart enough to be thinking through, like, I've got risks here, I need to deal with it. And then we can, of course, help them deal with it. But basically, there are other organizations that don't do that, and they'll end up in a spot where, you read about them in the newspaper, basically. We would suggest conducting pre-award audits. We talked about cultural alignment a minute ago. That's the second bullet. But we would suggest conducting pre-award audits for all major new suppliers, basically to address the strategic risks that I talked about earlier. Typically, when we're doing a pre-award audit, for example, on a capital project, the return is about $75 to 1, actually, on our fees on average, which is a lot. We don't charge that much. It's a pretty decent return. That's a pretty high return. And basically, we'll find that on these non-competitive procurements that the organization would have paid much more than it should have had the cost and pricing of that supplier not been looked at, and the supplier cost justification needed to be performed in order to satisfy the constituents of those who were doing the capital project. And we find one of our highest return areas for the work that we do as auditors is in looking at doing a pre-award audit. That means looking at the cost that the contractor wants to charge ahead of time and looking at other aspects of the contractor as well, of course, the things that we talked about earlier, so that you can get the best deal possible for your organization. Let's move on to a polling question here. Why perform a pre-award audit? So why would an organization do that?
And we'll go ahead and close those polls.
Okay.
All of the above.
Yeah, we clearly have good web students here for sure. So perfect. 96%, yes, all of the above. All those reasons. All right, let's move on to the next slide here. And Peter, I'll let you run with it.
So we're going to talk about a couple of the common supplier contractual control failures. Really, your contract is your binding agreement between you and your supplier that lists the terms, the expectations, and if issues do arise, it's what you're going to fall back on that's going to help you recover what you need to in each situation. Some of the keys, obviously you can look through these, but some of the key areas, really generic contracts without specific details. A lot of times we'll see some of our clients use very generic boilerplate contracts. They don't make them specific enough to whatever they're getting into. whether it's the pricing section or even some of the boilerplate clauses aren't specific to what they're trying to do, and they're just trying to make a boilerplate template fit because the price was right originally and it's cheaper to do that. Without really the proper review of that contract and making sure that each one is, that contract's going to fully protect you against all the issues, the money you're going to save up front by spending the time there compared to trying to figure it out legally later, that money is well spent up front in that. And then also, not having penalties or disincentives on the supplier for non-performance, whether that non-performance is quality-related, schedule-related, pricing-related, not having something in that contract that holds your suppliers to it can be a big issue. Again, some more failures that are common that we see: contracts lacking details, lacking schedule. The contract should have a schedule of when you're expecting your goods, how much time is needed if it's reoccurring orders. And then sole sourcing direct quantities. Curtis mentioned this earlier, but not letting the market determine the price on some of this stuff. It involves setting your scope up at the beginning so that you do get a good competitive bid on it, and then letting the market determine the price on it. And if you feel like the prices are changing, the markets we're dealing with right now are pretty volatile. And so setting your contract up for the right amount of contract, or for the right term length, so that you can reprice it out when needed if you feel like you need to, that those options are great to have in your contract. So some of the best practices and contract controls: really the multiple layers of review, having somebody from the operations side review some of the terms in the contract. Of course, legal should be involved, but management, accounting, who else can help in your contracts so that it's not just coming from legal or it's not just coming from operations, that really you're having a wide review across your organization, and making sure that each person that is reviewing, they know what they're reviewing and they know what they're reviewing it for. A lot of times something will go to somebody and they'll just sign off on it because they said, oh, well, this got reviewed by legal, it's good to go. But if the contracts go to the operations people, they need to understand why they're reviewing it, what they're looking for, and that this is going to be their binding contract with their supplier for the terms. And also ensuring that your contract compliance requirements are measurable. That's a big one, in that they're very specific, and they're specific enough to where you can hold your supplier to measurables. If they're not clear enough, if they're not measurable results, that it's a lot more difficult to enforce the contract terms. But if you have very specific measurables, it's very easy then, once the contract's been developed, to hold your supplier to those as long as it's clear.
Okay, so we're going to talk about common operational and compliance exposures. Basically issues we've seen with excellent results when our clients have taken action on them. The first one's just execution. The company wasn't executing on its own procedures and did upon understanding that it wasn't. Another is, basically we see this a lot where, again, a lot of times in capital projects where suppliers are failing to abide by their contract cost terms. A lot of times construction contractors particularly, we'll see charges that are just not compliant, and you wouldn't know that they're not compliant because you have to dig into the contractor's books and records to know that. But just to give you a feel for it, on average, we'll find about 15 times our fees when we audit, capital project suppliers, contractors for noncompliance. 15 times. I think it's a little better when we're getting the stock market today, but returns aren't, are up and down in the stock market. But that's a lot better than you get. That's a good investment to really look into exactly what is the basis for what you're being charged on your capital project and whether or not it's compliant. Also, in capital projects, and I'll just these next two bullets, basically, contract changes that are not your fault, or change order costs that are excessive, non-compliant, very common. I mean, we'll see like clients just, pay every single change order the contractor comes up with, but there isn't a good detailed look as to whether or not the client was responsible for it, or if the contractor caused it, or the design firm caused the issue. So that's important for you to understand the cause and who's responsible first, which is big bucks, and then also then understand whether or not the charges that are applied to those that you are responsible for example, you request a change, or you have, mainly owner requests, but you can also have conditions that are unforeseen, and whether or not those are being priced accordingly, properly, is critical too. Damaged brand, I'll just give you an example. We have this client that we worked with a while back, and they weren't doing a great job of verifying that their product had good quality. They just weren't doing it. It was just, they're kind of out of the loop, which is really, a lot of you are, I'm sure, scratching your heads on that one right now, but that's what they're doing. And essentially, they started realizing they had bad quality when all the products started coming back, and then customers started going to other companies that supply the same thing. So you don't want to be there, obviously, and it's critical to, again, basic blocking and tackling, verify the quality, and we're giving you a lot of detail, a lot of different basic blocking and tackling needs to take place. And this is another one where you've got to verify the quality on an ongoing basis. Ordering the wrong product at the wrong time, that has to do with misalignment in your procurement process that we talked about earlier. Unreliable supplier schedule performance. A lot of that comes from bad reporting, inaccurate reporting, incomplete reporting, and essentially not capturing the right information you need to have on an ongoing basis to know whether or not your supplier is performing the way they should, and then following up with them. Again, a lot of that can come from a functional look versus a holistic look at your supply chain. Just having people operate within their silos versus looking across the supply chain, which is core to your success. And of course then, failure to prevent or detect non-compliant billings through good control and follow up on those controls to see that they're operating the way that they should be. It's also critical to link supplier orders with customer requirements, obviously. You need to understand your processes, as we talked about. It's critical to have compliant, effective, and efficient procurement processes. This is, best practice. We talked about the need earlier to fit the contracting method you're applying to the type of goods and services you're procuring and your customer needs. We talked earlier about the need to ensure that you really understand the government requirements that you're entering into, because those are not all provided for you in the RFP or RFQ. You've got to really understand the rules that are not there, because you're held accountable for those. And then, of course, doing a pre-audit to verify, supplier capability and related controls, and ensuring that cultural fit is there that we talked about earlier. In terms of, other best operational and compliance controls that you should have, it's critical to have this ongoing compliance assessment of your supplier's billings. You need to not wait till the end of a project or wait too late with a supplier to look at whether or not its billings are compliant. It's critical to deal with those issues earlier on before you've completely paid a supplier. It's critical to understand the change causes that we talked about, service quality. I hope this is all coming home to you. Basically, the concepts we talked about earlier are listed here, and it's going to be critical for you to execute on these areas to be successful. And a part of that would be to conduct a supplier audit periodically to verify that the supplier is doing what it should be in terms of cost, schedule, quality, scope. So with that, we'll move on to another polling question here. And Tanya, you could take it away, but basically the question is, why are supplier contract compliance audits the best practice? Why would that be? Why would that be important?
Nicely done, Curtis. Thank you. I know we're getting a little pressed for time. Still great information. We likely will not get to the questions that we have, but again, we will follow up with you after the webinar to make sure that you do get your questions answered today. And we'll give this just another few seconds and we will close the polls and take a look at our results. There were no wrong answers.
Again, obviously you're an excellent group of students, and the 98% response rate was yes, that's critical. Now we just have some quick examples we're going to jump through. We're going to end on time, so we're going to hit these relatively quickly. But, you know, we talked about the first one already that had to do with the company that failed to understand its internal commitments. Failure to deliver high-quality product. Obviously, you know, that relates to verifying the supplier is providing the quality product that it should be and is charging what it should be. I would add that to the mix. Disconnect between customer demand requirements and factory loading. This is particularly interesting because this particular company this was working with a pretty large company. You know, the revenue's in the billions. They basically were spending $300,000 a year misjudging their demand, and essentially they didn't understand the planning approach or formula that was being applied to demand. They definitely were working outside and not connected with their sales organization. They weren't looking at order placement trends and order fulfillment trends. And as a result, they were losing about $25 million a year misjudging their demand by not applying good practices. So again, the concepts that we're talking about here have real implications to organizations, and this is a prime example of it that we wanted to share with you. So as far as do we need any more polling questions, Tanya, for people to get their CPE at this point?
Only if they have not done it. So if we can quickly go through this for anyone who may have missed. I had two people who missed it. The first one we'll quickly go through. Do supply chain compliance risks vary with the nature of the type of contracting purpose? Thank you, Curtis.
Okay.
If you need that final polling question, now is your opportunity. And we'll go ahead and close those polls.
Okay, absolutely right. 94%. I want to just clarify here for the 7%. In order for you to effectively procure your goods and services, you really have to understand the entire supply chain that you have and ensure that the alignment of that procurement matches your customer needs and wants and compliance requirements. We're going to wrap up here. We have tons of examples. You can call Peter or I anytime, and we can give you plenty of examples. And maybe, but at this point in time, we'd like to just kind of wrap up. So today, you've received practical guidance on supply chain risks and best practices. We did what we said we would do, and we've delivered that. We've explored a number of case studies and real-world supply chain management exposures and practices. We essentially, in 1 hour, we can't cover every single thing that we would like to cover with you, actually, in regards to this area of criticality to your business, but we have covered a large number of supply chain risks and best practices and real-world examples. We've also provided multiple best practices. You can go back to these slides. You can create guidance, for yourself, and we would encourage you to do that. We would like to encourage each person here today to take the materials we provided and think about the procurement that you have within maybe the next week or so, the procurements you have. Think about your processes, and hopefully, identify changes, opportunities to influence your organization and to be successful as you're working with your suppliers. And with that, I'll turn the time back over to Tanya, and we're at the end of our webinar here. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Peter. Thank you, Curtis. Again, have questions, please don't hesitate to let us know. And you will receive shortly following the webcast a copy of the slides. In addition, you'll also have the opportunity to review the material again. This presentation is available on demand. We thank you for your time today. Enjoy the day.